Other strategies to resist persuasion: bias processing. So you can weight the attributes. So you can attach more weight to information that's consistent with your own attitude and less weight to information that's inconsistent with your own attitude, right? So I saw a story in the free press. Well, no, I don't think it was a free press. It was a newspaper. I'll say that. I saw a story in a newspaper that I thought was really interesting. The woman lived in New Orleans, I believe, like a little tiny area, and or Louisiana, I should say, and her home had been flooded quite a bit, right? Flooded quite a bit. And her home has continuously been flooded. She said this was like the seventh time she was trying to get her insurance and paperwork together. But what was really interesting is that they asked her about global warming, and she was saying that she doesn't put a lot of weight into global warming. So she doesn't really believe that global warming is much of the cause of kind of what's happening with the increased flooding. So again, this was inconsistent with her own attitude, so she put less weight toward it. Another bias processing strategy is optimism bias. We tend to believe that negative things are less likely to happen to us. We also tend to downplay the risk or exaggerate our abilities to control a situation. There's a study that's actually pretty interesting where they essentially tell people, like literally, they say, hey, did you know that, 25% of people get robbed throughout their lifetime? And then they ask people, knowing this, what percentage, what's the chance that you'll be robbed? No one chose 20, or not no one, very few people chose 25%. Like there's a 25% chance I'll be robbed. A lot of people chose, there's a 0% chance I'll be robbed or whatever. And a lot of the reason is that people believe that they can control whatever happens to them. So they believe that they can control the situation such that they won't be robbed, and or they believe that it's just less likely to happen to them, right? Because we tend to be optimistic about ourselves. Another strategy would be reducing impact. So this is actually really fascinating. So is optimism bias. Let me say, I think optimism bias is really fascinating. But I think reducing impact is fascinating with a capital, fast. Anyway, so when reducing impact happens, is you isolate the judgments of the negative information so it doesn't spill over to judgments of the object. So remember we talked about the halo effect, and if you watch the little video that I attached, it's this idea that one negative attribute or a couple of negative attributes will spill over such that you will have one positive attribute or several positive attributes of a product or service will spill over so that you believe that the entire product or entire service is good. So we could say something like Subway has a halo effect because Subway sandwiches, because people assume just because, that the sandwich is quote unquote fresh, the products are fresh, that they also are healthy. So you see this spillover here, right? We assume that because McDonald's it has a burger, that everything in McDonald's is unhealthy. That would be the horns effect. So anyway, in this instance, when you're reducing impact, you're isolating judgments of the negative information so it doesn't spill over. So what does that mean? Let me give you a few examples. Apple, that's why I have this, Apple here. So Apple has had some problems with their products. Let's just be honest. So I think their 2017, 2018, 2019, one of these years, they had a keyboard, a butterfly keyboard that came with their computers, and there were problems with the keyboard itself, right? People were saying that the keyboard would get stuck and all kinds of sorts of things, right? So this was problematic. What I didn't see, and I think a lot of people didn't see, is a spillover such that people said, well, then Apple products are trash. This keyboard problem means that all Apple products or the MacBook, which is, the problem with the keyboard was on the MacBook, is a trash product. They just kind of isolated the negative information, i.e. the keyboard, and said that, it is kind of what it is. You can think about right now So I believe the new iPhone 12 is coming out soon, which if you're an Apple fan, you might be excited about. So the new 12 is coming out, and it does not include the charger block, right? And some people have said, oh, they're not including the charger block because they want to be good for the environment, and a lot of people own their own charger blocks, and people are just isolating this to say, hey, Apple is still great, even though they're offering you a product without a method, an electronic product at that, without a method to charge it, which seems kind of counterproductive to me, right? Just examples of how people will isolate negative judgments about something and not let that information spill over, right? I mean, I'm sure we can think of even better examples. Maybe you dislike members of your team, but you don't necessarily think that this class is terrible. On the other hand, you might really kind of dislike members of your team and you think, hey, this class is terrible because they put me with these teammates, right? Either way. But if you're reducing impact, you say, hey, my team is terrible, but the class itself is valuable. I hope that's what you're saying. Actually, what I hope you're saying is I love this class and I love my team. I really, really hope you love your team. I really hope you love this class, but I really, really hope you love your team because bad teammates are something else. So this is actually kind of interesting too. Another method to resist persuasion are these empowerment strategies. So you can bolster your attitude, right? So you hear information, and instead of saying, "I don't believe that," you just say, "Hey, I like XYZ, and I still like XYZ, and I like XYZ because of one, two, three." So for example, you hear all of these studies that come out all the time about food products, right? So for example, you hear all these studies that come out that talk about coffee or wine and how they're either good or bad for you. So if you're a wine lover and you hear a study on TV that says, wine can be bad and it could give you, really bad teeth, it could, mess up your teeth or something, you could just think to yourself, you know what? I really like wine. Wine helps calm me down. Wine is a good thing. Yada, 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 right? Another strategy is social validation. You can seek validation from significant others. Those others, of course, don't necessarily have to be your boyfriend, your husband, your girlfriend, so on and so forth, but people who are significant in your life, right? So you like X and other people tell you that it's horrible, and you go to these significant others and you say, hey, I like X. What do you think? And what you want them to say is that they think X is fine as well, right? And then last but not least, self-assertions. You can remind yourself that nothing can change your attitude because you are confident about your attitude. We see this in politics all the time on the left and the right, where people, no matter what's said about a politician, people say, you know what, I still like them and I'm still confident about them. One thing that has been found when it comes to self-assertions is that people with high self-esteem tend to be really confident about their own opinions, and they're confident about their own opinions because they don't really feel social pressure, right? They don't feel the need to kind of agree with the crowd, right? To a certain extent, I can say that I fall under this category. I don't necessarily think I have the highest self-esteem, but I haven't really been one to kind of feel a lot of social pressure to conform. And I will tell you why. Growing up, a couple of things. My mom was all about individuality. And my mom would teach me this thing that my friends in college and friends and people that I know and significant others really hate. And that is that I am my own best friend, right? My mom used to tell me this all the time. You are your own best friend. No one will love you. No one will treat you better than you treat yourself. No one will love you better than you treat yourself or love yourself, so on and so forth. Always remember that. You are your own best friend. And because my mom taught me that, I actually kind of buy into it. Actually, let me rephrase. I buy into it. And so I don't have as much social pressure to, make friends or kind of do what other people think I should do because, you know, worst case scenario, you don't like me, but I still kind of like myself. And so that's been, I guess, helpful in some ways. Okay, so I can't talk about resistance to persuasion without talking about why people might be resistant to persuasion. And I can't talk about that without kind of talking about reactance theory. So, reactance theory is huge. It's huge in the field of psychology, it's huge in the field of marketing, it's huge if you're talking about persuasion. So, what is reactance theory? So, reactance theory essentially says that consumers have this innate desire for autonomy and independence, right? Autonomy and independence. And consumers experience psychological reaction when they sense that their freedom is threatened or eliminated, right? So if you're doing something to threaten their freedom, they are going to have a huge level of reactance. They are motivated then to maintain and restore the threatened opinion that they have or the threatened behavior that they have, right? So if you say something like, hey, you can't go to X place, right? There are people who will have psychological reactance and they are motivated to kind of go to X place. We can see this playing out right now, right? With masks and lockdowns. There are people who feel as though the mask and the lockdowns threaten their sense of autonomy, their sense of independence, and they are experiencing and demonstrating psychological reactance. And so they are doing things like um, maintaining their opinions that, you know, masks are stupid, that science is dumb, whatever. And they are motivated to get back to these lockdown places, or at least they say they are. Here is an example on the right. If you look at, there was a study that was done. They had 84 people. Roughly half the people were loyal consumers, and half the people were new consumers. Right? Loyal consumers and new consumers. And what they did was they gave each person an $85 gift card, or I'm sorry, a $25 gift card, and told them they can spend up to $25 on a product. They then showed the people a assertive ad, right? So the ad was like, "You must buy our product. Our product is better. You need to buy our product. You need to blah 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 blah, whatever." Right? And what they found was really, really interesting. In the loyal consumer group, consumers that had been shown the assertive ad, you know, the hey, you must buy our product, spent significantly less money than people who saw an unassertive ad. And this is among loyal customers, right? So if you show them an ad that's like, you must buy our product, according to kind of this paper, the authors are saying consumers felt this kind of reactance because they felt threats to their autonomy and threats to their independence. You're telling me something that I must do. And so then they just spent less money. For new consumers, they also spent less money when they were shown the assertive ad, but it wasn't as high as a gap as loyal consumers, right? So just know that, like, psychological reactance is a huge deal. And when you're trying to come up with a marketing campaign, whether it's price, whether it's the message that you're telling consumers, whatever it is, that you really, really, really need to make sure that you understand psychological reactance, and that and that whatever you're doing doesn't kind of evoke psychological reactance. So another reason that people experience resistance to persuasion is that they're just reluctant to change. Charles Darwin said that, you know, it's not the strongest that survives, nor the most intelligent. It's the one that's most responsive to change. Now, I will say this: I am not so responsive to change. I'm not. I gotta admit it. When websites change their formats, I'm like, what is this? When software changes, when the weather changes, I'm just not as kind of responsive to change as I could be. So people are reluctant to change because they want to retain their existing beliefs. They want to kind of um, do what they've always done because the known is much easier, and the unknown often implies that you don't have control over a situation, right? Um, Change may kind of create situations where you fear that you're not being consistent or that something is not being consistent, and that, changing a behavior or an opinion or an attitude will lead to these consistencies with your prior beliefs or behaviors. And we know from other lectures in class that, consistency is something that all humans really want to maintain. So those are reasons why people might be reluctant to change.
So again, we're talking about cognitive biases. So what are cognitive biases? The term cognitive bias is an umbrella term. It refers to systematic ways in which context and framing of information influence a consumer's judgment and decision making. It is systematic, right? It is a systematic error in thinking. It is not random, it's systematic in the sense that it produces judgments that deviate from what would be considered logical or desirable in terms of logic. So these biases influence us to do things that aren't necessarily logical. Or another way to put this, it makes us deviate from the optimal choice. For example, a major cognitive bias is the decoy effect, right? So on the first day of class, I talk about this idea that it, that economists have noticed that if you ask consumers to buy a online news subscription versus online and print, most consumers will choose the online. However, if you offer online, print, and online and print, uh, consumers will often buy the online and print, even though it costs the same as print by itself, and it makes no logical reason there, or I should say, it makes no logical sense. Consumers will often choose the third option because there's a third option there. That is a cognitive bias. The decoy effect is a cognitive bias. You should know that there are hundreds of cognitive biases, hundreds of them, that routinely limit rational thinking, distort behavior, and derail decisions. So oftentimes we consider ourselves to be pretty rational decision makers, so on and so forth, but that's really just not true because marketers and other people know that if you frame a decision or frame information or context of information, you can affect or influence consumer outcomes or consumer choice. So we tend to rely on these cognitive biases because they feel comfortable and they help us resolve issues quickly. If you remember, I mentioned the fact that we as consumers are cognitive misers. We do not want to put a huge amount of thought um, into thinking. So we can even look at something like the influence of package size. So you can see in this chart that there's a difference in how much consumers use based on the size of the package. If the package is small, consumers often use less detergent than if the package itself is large. Why is that? Why do consumers use more detergent for larger package sizes? Is it because they feel as though they need to? Or is it that a large package size signals to them, excuse me, or acts like a cue that they need to use more detergent? If you're a product manufacturer and you look at this chart, if you're bleach, there's really very little difference. So, you can make a small or a large package of bleach and you're fine. But if you are a manufacturer or the manufacturer of Tide and you look at this chart, you think to yourself, we actually do better um, when consumers purchase a larger package because they consume more, which means they consume faster, which means they go ahead and buy more product. So again, this would be an example of a use situation that, frankly, provides a lot of information to a product manufacturer and a product marketer. Okay, so I want to talk about the difference between cognitive biases and heuristics. And I'm going to start off by saying something that sounds outrageous but is true. We know, and when I say we, I would say the research community, know that there's a difference between a cognitive bias and a heuristic, right? Let me start there. But actually defining the differences has been tough, and there are a couple of, I would actually say several different definitions. There are some people who say that um, a heuristic is a cognitive bias, which I actually believe as well. A heuristic is a cognitive bias, but they're not really kind of separating the two to kind of understand what each is and how they're separate. Or there are people who say heuristics can lead to cognitive biases, which I also agree with. Anyway, that said, I'm going to give you a couple of different definitions of each that I think actually sound and are correct, but I wouldn't say one is more correct than the other. I think a real definition of, or no, a real differentiation between the two would include every single one of these points. So, cognitive biases are predictable patterns of thought or behavior. Of thought and behavior leading to incorrect conclusions. This is true. Cognitive biases typically are predictable patterns of thought and behavior. Cognitive biases are not a cognitive evaluation of a situation, but rather a belief or an influence based on preference and or desired public perception. This actually rings true as well. And then last but not least, a bias in decision making that occurs when the choices you make systemically, whichever one you prefer, differs from the optimal choice. Again, this is true, and it's really just a rehatching of the first one if you think about it. Heuristics. Heuristics are mental shortcuts to solve common problems. They are. They are typically oversimplified evaluations of situations based on experiences or learn lessons from others. Also true. And last but not least, a heuristic is a cognitive shortcut that allows you to make faster, rough decisions that are often good enough. Also true. So again, cognitive biases versus heuristics. One are these mental shortcuts that help you solve common problems. Cognitive biases often don't rely on kind of evaluations of situations. Really, they are more of a belief and an influence, and they create these systematic or systemically thoughts and behaviors that lead to incorrect conclusions.
Reason why people experience resistance to persuasion is that they're concerned about deception, which I think is valid, right? So we are concerned with belief, or we are, very, very enthusiastic about the idea that our belief systems are correct and truthful, and we tend to be defensive of our attitudes because of that. We want to hold accurate attitudes and opinions, and that's really important when we're processing information. I want to believe what I believe about political candidates, about the way the country should be ran, about kind of what different amendments mean, about what the pandemic should mean for consumers, about whether or not kids should be going to school right now. I want to believe that my opinions and my attitudes are important. And so when I read the news and I read kind of information that may um, be different than what is kind of in my kind of mind, it may be that I just don't process that information. I don't pay attention to that information because I don't want anything that kind of comes in the way of what I already believe. We often scrutinize information, again, by searching for supportive information and avoiding conflicting information. I love this picture on the left. So this guy is kind of confused and he's trying to see if this other guy is lying. And that's something we do quite a bit, right? We're skeptical because we don't know if things are truthful.